The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above the long stretch of lockers in the Columbus Middle School hallway, their sterile glow casting pale shadows across the scuffed linoleum floor where groups of students lingered before the first bell, chattering, laughing, shuffling books between arms, phones glowing in their hands. But in the middle of this ordinary morning scene, something unusual had unfolded. Something sharp enough to cut through the hum of teenage noise and silence a cluster of eyes. A tall white police officer, broad-shouldered in his crisp Columbus police uniform, stood with his arms folded tightly across his chest, posture oozing authority, his mouth curled into the smug half-smile of someone who already believed he had the upper hand, his gaze fixed downward on a single girl, a 14-year-old black student named Amara Johnson, dressed neatly in her white shirt and blue sweater vest, clutching the strap of her backpack against her chest as though to anchor herself against the tide of stares around her, her expression calm but serious, her brows drawn together with the weight of being called out in front of her peers. The officer had stopped her casually at first, asking mockingly if she had been up to trouble, and when Amara had met his smirk with a steady voice, low but firm, and told him, "My father is in the Special Forces," his laugh had rung out louder than any other sound in the hallway, bouncing off the lockers like a slap. A laugh quickly echoed by a few students who thought siding with the uniform made them bold, and in that moment Amara's world seemed to shrink, every pair of eyes darting toward her, whispers flitting between giggles, her truth twisted into a punchline, and yet she stood her ground, chin lifted slightly, heart hammering, but her father's words echoing inside her. Never let anyone steal your truth, no matter how loud they laugh. But Officer Miller, his name stitched proudly into the patch above his badge, leaned down, just enough to loom over her, the smirk refusing to leave his face, saying in a voice that dripped with mockery, "Special Forces? Sure, kid." The laughter didn't stop. Rather, it spread like wildfire, feeding off the officer's smirk and rolling to the hallway as more students trickled in, phones held aloft, lenses catching every humiliating angle of Amara's face as though her dignity was something to be documented and consumed. But through the noise she stood, her chest tight, her breath shallow, her eyes steady, because inside she replayed the memory of her father's voice on the night before his last deployment when he had seen our kid. If your dad were anything close to that, he wouldn't be letting you wander around lying for attention, his words cutting sharp as knives, each syllable followed by a chorus of jeers from the crowd, and Amara clenched her fists by her sides, whispering again, not for him but for herself, "My father is in the Special Forces." Her voice steady though the sting of humiliation burned hot in her cheeks. Miller tilted his head, enjoying the spectacle, feeding off the imbalance of power, and added, mockingly, "Should I call home for you, huh? Maybe get your daddy on the line? Or is he too busy in Call of Duty to answer?" And the laughter swelled again, some students slapping lockers, others shoving each other, one girl muttering just loud enough, "She's making it up," and another boy recording whispering, "This is going viral," the tide of ridicule rising around her until even Principal Carter's nervous attempts to wave it down failed, her voice drowned out by the chaos of teenagers emboldened by authority's cruel example. And yet Amara didn't move, didn't cry, didn't give them the collapse they wanted, because she knew what they didn't. Her father was real, her father was near, and her father never let a lie stand unchallenged for long. Still, the hallway felt suffocating, every second stretching into a battle of endurance, and Miller wasn't done. He crouched slightly so his mocking grin was level with her eyes, saying in a voice low but audible to all, "You know what happens to liars? They get exposed, right here, right now." And the weight of his words pressed against her chest, daring her to break. But instead she inhaled, lifted her chin, and repeated in a voice steady enough to cut through the noise, "My father is in the Special Forces." And in that moment, a ripple of unease shivered through the crowd. Not because they believed her, but because something in the way she said it sounded unshakable, too certain to be dismissed as childish bravado, and though Miller laughed, again, a little too loud this time, trying to drown out that flicker of doubt, Amara's heart was already pounding for a reason no one else yet knew. Somewhere, just beyond the end of that long hallway, heavy boots were already moving in her direction, and the storm she had endured was seconds away from being answered. The sound arrived first, deep, steady, and deliberate, the unmistakable rhythm of heavy boots striking linoleum, echoing from the far end of the hallway where a shaft of pale morning, Light filtered through the glass doors, and though most of the students were too caught up in their laughter to notice, Amara heard it instantly, her breath catching in her chest, her heart leaping in recognition, for she knew that cadence, had grown up with it, the sound of discipline and strength, the sound of her father's return. And as the noise grew louder, conversation faltered, laughter weakened, heads turned toward the source, and the atmosphere shifted as if the very air recognized. Authority approaching. Officer Miller paused mid-taunt, his smirk stiffening as he followed the gaze of the crowd, and from the light emerged a towering figure, broad-shouldered, built like stone, dressed not in casual clothes but in full tactical military gear, a black bulletproof vest strapped tight across his chest, combat boots laced high, camouflage pants tucked sharp, sunglasses hiding eyes that seemed to pierce even to the lenses, and his stride, calm, confident, measured, carried the unspoken weight of a man who had walked into danger and returned without bowing, each step shrinking the laughter around him into silence. Students parted instinctively, the crowd peeling back like waves retreating from a storm, and for the first time that morning, Amara felt her spine unclench, pride swelling as tears threatened but did not fall, because there was Sergeant Marcus Johnson, her father, her protector, her truth embodied in flesh and blood, walking straight toward her with the quiet power of a man who didn't need to announce who he was because his presence spoke louder than words, and the officer who had ridiculed her suddenly looked smaller, his crossed arms loosening, his weight shifting uneasily as he tried to mask the sudden dryness in his throat. Marcus stopped just a few feet from them, lifted his hand, and with slow precision removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes as sharp and unyielding as steel, eyes that locked onto Miller with a focus that froze him in place before finally softening as they fell on Amara, a flicker of pride passing across his face. And then, in a voice deep, steady, and carrying the kind of authority that silences battlefields, Marcus said only 3 words that shattered the tension of the hallway. "I'm her father," and in that instant the entire space held its breath. The students who had mocked Amara now wide-eyed and speechless, phones trembling in their hands as they recorded a scene no one could have scripted. Principal Carter standing frozen near her office door with her mouth half open, and Officer Miller, suddenly stripped of his smirk, forced to swallow the bitter truth that the girl he had mocked had spoken nothing but reality, and that reality now stood before him in the flesh, an immovable wall of dignity and power that no ridicule could diminish. The Special Forces soldier whose silence alone spoke louder than any insult ever could. For a long, charged moment the hallway was silent, the kind of silence that presses on every chest, heavy and breathless, as Marcus Johnson stood between his daughter and the officer who had mocked her, his broad frame casting a shadow across the lockers, while Amara's classmates, who only minutes earlier had laughed at her, now stared with the uneasy or reserved for legends stepping out of stories. And when Marcus finally spoke again, his voice was calm, measured, and precise, but every syllable carried the force of command drilled into soldiers on foreign soil. "Why are you laughing at a child for speaking the truth?" The question was not shouted, but its gravity rang louder than any insult, and Miller, who only a moment ago had leaned smugly against the lockers, found himself faltering, straightening his posture, his smirk gone, his lips parting with stammered excuses. "I was just she. Kids lie sometimes, you know how it is." But the words collapsed under Marcus's gaze, a gaze honed by years of reading men's souls under pressure of life and death. And Marcus took one step closer, the weight of his boots reverberating through the floor as he continued. "You wear a badge. You're supposed to protect, not humiliate. You wear a uniform. You're supposed to model discipline, not mock a child's pride." His words, slicing through the thick air, and the students, their phones still recording, were no longer entertained but transformed into witnesses of a lesson they would never forget, their young faces shifting from amusement to shame as they realized the cruelty they had joined. Principal Carter tried to interject with a wavering, "Sergeant Johnson, perhaps we can discuss this in my office." But Marcus didn't break his stare from Miller, his voice cutting cleanly across hers. "No, we'll discuss it here, in front of every eye that watched to be humiliated, because respect is not something you hide behind closed doors. It's something you demonstrate." And at that, a murmur rippled through the students, some nodding unconsciously, the tide turning in Amara's favor. Miller's jaw tightened, pride warring with the reality that he was shrinking under the presence of a man who commanded more respect with silence than he ever could with authority. and in a desperate attempt to salvage control, he muttered, "Look, I didn't know. I just thought she was exaggerating." But Marcus leaned in slightly, his tone steady as stone. "You thought wrong, and instead of listening, you laughed. You mocked the daughter of a man who's bled for this country so manlike you can stand here safe, and you dare to call her a liar." The final word rang in the air, heavy as judgment, and Miller swallowed hard, the flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck, his eyes darting to the circle of students recording every second, knowing this moment would live longer than his excuse. Marcus then turned, lowering himself to Amara's eye level, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, his expression softening into pride she had longed to see, and he said, low but firm, "You stood your ground. You didn't let them steal your truth, and I am proud of you." And those words, spoken in front of everyone who had mocked her, lifted her chin higher than any laughter could bend it, her chest swelling with the strength of being seen, defended, and validated, while Miller, stripped of his power, his smirk shattered, took a slow, uneasy step back, unable to find another word, and in that retreat, in that silence, the balance of the hallway shifted. Respect reclaimed, dignity restored, a father's authority silencing arrogance not with fists or fury, but with truth that no one could deny, leaving every witness with the image of a young girl no longer standing alone, but beside the living proof of her words. Her father, the soldier who had, turned a moment of ridicule into a lesson carved into memory. The hallway that had moments earlier echoed with laughter now throbbed with stunned, reverent silence. Every student frozen in place, as if unwilling to break the spell of what they had just witnessed, and in the center of it stood Amara, her father's steady hand resting on her shoulder, her small frame no longer trembling beneath the weight of ridicule, but lifted by the quiet power of truth that had finally been seen. And when Marcus rose to his full height again, sliding his sunglasses back onto his face with deliberate calm, the effect was cinematic, like a curtain falling on a scene. Yet before he turned to leave, he cast one last measured glance at Officer Miller, who stood stiff, his once proud stance hollowed into something resembling shame, the flush on his face betraying the humiliation of having been stripped of arrogance by nothing more than presence and words. Marcus didn't need to add another syllable, because his silence said what the students already understood. Respect isn't demanded with mockery. It's earned through integrity, and Miller, shrinking back against the lockers, seemed to realize that for the first time. Principal Carter, adjusting her glasses with trembling hands, stepped forward as though to patch the moment with bureaucratic formality, but her voice cracked into a stutter before she managed to whisper, "Amara, Sergeant Johnson, I owe you both an apology." Her admission landing weakly in the air, yet it was enough to stir the crowd. The same students who had laughed now staring at Amara with a mixture of guilt and awe, their phones lowered, their whispers subdued into silence. And when Marcus finally spoke again, his words were for his daughter alone, bending slightly so she alone could hear. "You never needed me to prove your truth, Amara. You carried it all along. I just came so they could see it." And tears pricked her eyes, not from shame this time, but from pride, the warmth of belonging flooding her chest as she straightened her shoulders, looking around to faces of those who had doubted her, no longer wishing to disappear, but daring them to look back, to see her as she truly was. The daughter of a soldier, the daughter of strength, the daughter who stood alone and refused to fold. With that, Marcus guided her gently forward, the crowd parting. Instinctively, as father and daughter walked down the long stretch of lockers side by side, each step echoing like a drumbeat of respect reclaimed. And by the time the doors at the end of the hallway swung open, spilling sunlight across their figures, Amara's head was held high, her dignity not just restored but magnified, her father's silhouette towering beside her as a living testament to truth, leaving behind a hallway of students whose lesson that day would never fade. That laughter can be cruel, power can be misused, but truth, when carried with courage, will always be louder. And in that silence which followed them out the door, every soul who had witnessed a moment knew they had seen something unforgettable. The unbreakable bond between a black girl and her father, a special forces soldier whose mere presence turned humiliation into honor, and whose love left an imprint on the walls of that school forever.